Hi, Kyra.
Hi, Leah.
How are you?
I'm doing well. Glad to be here today.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Jessa Speaks. This season is about the medical field from the perspective of women of color. And so I'm just going to get started with the first question and ask you, how do you identify?
I identify as a Black woman.
Cool. And I know that you are med school student. Just
hmm
took your boards, trying to get into residency. Can you
Yeah.
tell me about your profession, what you're going for, and representation?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like kind of like you said, I'm in my final year of medical school. I'm starting that process of applying for training after medical school, and I'm going into family medicine. Which is kind of where I think the majority of physicians of color are usually practicing in primary care.
Hmm.
As far as medical training, I'm at the University of Minnesota. And so Minnesota in general is like a less diverse state than some others, especially other states with really large cities. But for example, my class is about 170 students in Minneapolis, and um, 35% are multicultural. But so far as Black students, about 9% of us are Black, with most of that being African immigrants
Hmm.
or first generation Africans. So there's really only a sprinkling of like American Black students in my class.
Do you know why more people of color are in family medicine? Have you heard why
I
that is?
Yeah, so people, I think there have been a lot of studies that people of color, like physicians in training of color, tend to be the folks that go back and want to serve their communities.
Makes sense.
And a lot more of the community health training and practice is within like family medicine, pediatrics, even internal medicine if you're practicing outpatient.
And do you hope to have that type of impact on your community as well?
I do. I spent my last year, my third year of medical school, working with a predominantly Black patient population. And there was also a very large immigrant population as well. And I really loved it a lot. It was at a federally qualified health center. So very well resourced by federal funds, but the patients were very low socioeconomic status. And I really felt passionate about working with that patient population.
And did you feel that, they kind of leaned on you for like trust and, how to get their information? Did you feel that they opened up to you?
Oh, 100%. I think that there's immediately kind of an alliance almost that's formed just by having a similar background
Background.
racially. Like you
Mm-hmm.
kind of move through the world in a more similar way than like if I were a white physician. And so there's been so many times that patients have been, especially like, surrounding the COVID vaccine or COVID in general, where um, they seek the counsel or input of practitioners of color. They don't just take what's in the news or what's circulating on the internet at face value. They want to hear it from someone who looks like them. So,
Yeah. And I mean, I think that just hits home like why it's just so important that there are more folks in the field so that people go to their doctor more on a regular basis and not just when something's wrong. So they're,
yeah,
keeping up with their health and yeah, and not when it's just dire. And was
100%.
and was there a time in your field that you dealt with racism as a Black medical student, or has it been pretty tame? What have you seen?
I will say it has been better than I anticipated. I
It's
think
good.
I often hear a lot of horror stories of patients, being really overtly racist and saying like, I don't want you to treat me because you're Black or whatever
Mm-hmm.
minority race. I would say the one example that comes to mind was actually with like nursing staff, where I was working in the ICU, and I was doing some charting on the computer, wearing the same color scrubs that like physicians wear. And one of the nurses came up to me and asked if I was with housekeeping, and I was like, context clues. I'm like, I'm wearing scrubs that are the colors that physicians wear. I'm charting on a computer. Nothing about that says housekeeping. So you have to wonder about some implicit bias of like the only Black woman sitting in, on a computer in the station. She
Yeah.
must not belong here. Like, what is she doing here? So that was probably the most overt example I've experienced. I've had things like that we experience in day-to-day life, patients wanting to touch my hair, patients like asking questions about, it's like kind of, you're just like, okay. But I think sometimes that comes with being Black, but I can take that. I can deal with that and educate that any day over some of the more overt stuff.
And of course, there's nothing wrong with being a housekeeper, but like you said, context clues. If you're wearing the colors of the scrubs, and if you're on the computer, probably not.
Yeah,
probably
exactly.
not doing that. Okay. And do you have any comments about people of color in the medical field? The textbooks, common misdiagnoses, misconceptions that present as facts?
Yeah. So I'll first say that like only as of I think 2018, only 5% of actively practicing physicians identify as Black. So there are significantly fewer Black physicians relative to like the population, like the percentage of Black folks in the US population. Sure. I think the two places in medicine where you see implicit bias and racism really come into play is in the emergency department. And then also in labor and delivery with obstetrics.
Yes.
There's a lot of assumptions about laboring people. The stereotypes that, Asian women are good birthers or good laborers. They're more stoic and quiet, whereas Black women, Black laborers are like hysterical. They are exaggerating their pain. They're overplaying, the whole experience. And I'm not sure exactly like how and where that like started, but I think across the various hospitals I've worked at, that insidious attitude towards birthing patients is pretty common.
Wow. And I mean, I don't know if it comes from, with people being enslaved and just seeing people as less. So like they experience less pain. So it's like, oh no, they don't feel pain, but definitely something that has to change. There's an Instagram and there's a Black male. He is in med school. He may be a resident by now, actually, but he kind of breaks down like the history of so many different stereotypes about a lot of times with like the Black community, but different backgrounds. And I find it really fascinating that, some textbooks are not up to date. They still have these myths in them. So it's so important that we become more aware about that. But yeah, that's really great. Thanks for sharing. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
And what is something you think people misunderstand about Black culture? And what would you like people to know that your favorite part about being a Black woman is?
Oh, yeah. So I think a common misconception for like, particularly like Black patients is like the use of our vernacular, right? African-American vernacular English, or embracing like our natural hairstyles or the dress, kind of those things in our culture. They're often seen as unprofessional, or that patients who present this way are viewed as less intelligent, and that has use of AAVE has nothing to do with intelligence level, as I know, the use of code switching, like to feel the need to have to do that a lot growing up, is very common. And I think another assumption is that people view Black individuals as a monolith. And so one thing I want people to know is that, Black people, there's no one way to be Black, right? Like, we are all different. We have varied interests, whether that's more mainstream, like how the media presents Black culture, or just like we are in all sectors of life, all sectors of work, there's no one way to be Black. And my favorite part of Black culture is really how resilient we are. We use humor, music, art to cope with really some egregious things that have been done to us as a people in history. And I think that we are some of the most creative, experienced, and educated people in the country. You know, Black women are some of the highest educated demographics in the US. So I think that we're just so resilient. And I think that's something that I love about Black culture.
Yeah, I love that. And I love you saying like there's not one way to be Black. It's sometimes our culture, we need to remember that. It's okay if someone likes anime or someone likes monster trucks or if they like rap or if they like singing. Like we can do it all. It's okay for us to be more than one thing. It doesn't make us less than, it just makes us like everyone else.
Exactly.
And that's what we need to see. We're just like everyone else. So don't touch our hair without permission.
That part.
Well, Kyra, I want to thank you for your time and just sharing your story and your experience being in the Black medical field or being a Black woman in the medical field. But obviously, you're setting an example and precedence, like you'll be someone's doctor one day. They're like, oh man, I can do that too if they want to do that. So thank you so much for your time and joining us on Justice Speaks today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Thank you.